There are fewer questions more exhausting than can we separate the art from the artist. Writer-director Todd Field's film Tar, starring Cate Blanchett, explores the age-old theme in a modern context. Tar follows the career of a fictional rising star in the world of symphony conductors. Lydia Tar has risen to become the first woman director of the Berlin Philharmonic. The film explores her relationships with a variety of male colleagues, her partner and concertmaster, her mistreated assistant, and her fierce infatuation with a young cellist. It also explores her insecurity as a composer, her dismissiveness about accusations against her, her obliviousness about the vulnerability of her position and reputation in the face of cancel culture attacks, and her fragile mental health. Evocative of There Will Be Blood, the film poses questions about the corrosive effect of ambition on relationships, the ways in which artistic vision seems to legitimize or make allowances for cruelty, and the naivete, hypocrisy, and grossly judgmental spirit at the heart of cancel culture. Cate Blanchett's Tar is a complex character. At the outset, she is a role model, trailblazer, iconoclast, and universally respected professional at the peak of classical music. Also from the outset, she is capricious, aloof. We see her become socially performative when she is preoccupied with other things. She tactfully maneuvers people around. Most of her professional relationships are practical or have ulterior motives, and collapse easily because they have little foundation of warmth, empathy, or particular loyalty. People are more moving parts in an ongoing social and professional process. Even her enduring relationship with another woman and fellow musician is subdued, with only occasional demonstrable feeling. The idea of people as social, professional, and relational moving parts naturally fits with her role as a conductor. She is constantly striving to impart the nuances of what she wants from orchestra players, the construction of the technically and emotionally perfect rendition of a piece. And the moments of cohesion and beauty from the orchestra, which are depicted fleetingly, are the few moments in the film where there is release from the general tension and gradually escalating problems. This is emphasized by the rest of the music in the film being largely fragmentary, unfinished or undeveloped compositions, interrupted music, and minor or suspended keys full of tension, so that the brief moments of the orchestra delivering, almost always in a resolving major key, are like brightenings in the movie. The arc of the film is essentially Tar's decline, in terms of her own assured reputation and professional certainty, to her relationships and the trust afforded by those around her, to our own estimation of her as viewers, as hints are given more and more of her exerting her influence in dubious ways, elevating musicians she desires, procuring sexual favors, exploiting her power and position, spurning and blighting the reputation and potential of those it is implied fell foul of her, and emotionally neglecting those in her inner circle. Blanchett is brilliantly able to keep Tar compelling. Even as she becomes less sympathetic, she imbues Tar with immense presence so we can feel regular people intimidated by or magnetically drawn to her, and the swells of jealousy and tension this creates in others whose relationships or connections might be threatened by new figures on the scene. Blanchett is also adept at balancing the coldness, the emotional obliviousness, and sometimes callousness of Tar with moments of genuine devotion and reconciliation, so that, even as the walls are closing in around her and she seems to succumb to some unnamed affliction or disassociation, we still at some level want her to regain her authority and poise and resolve her issues, even when her decline has seemingly become inevitable. Blanchett also brilliantly balances Tar as an object of sexual desire and pronounced sexual success, with her being driven along, almost irresistibly, by craven desires and impulses and fixations that cast her in a highly unsympathetic light as someone who, sexually and emotionally, is careless of the lives of others. This blind spot, her lack of perception of how accurately and fulsomely others around her have sussed out her motivations and know they are being sidelined or lied to, contributes to Tar's downfall. The last interesting element of this is a tacit admission or allowance the viewer makes to some degree that her actions and more cynical and exploitative impulses were often typical of a number of men in her position. Scenes throughout Tar are conspicuously composed with severe right angles and parallel lines, a succession of images divided or resolving into squares and rectangles. This adds a formalism that evokes the compartmentalized nature of Tar's life, her order and precision, her sensibilities, the decor and aesthetics of her wealth, and as a means of emphasizing the emotional and relational separations and complex intersections between the characters. It also creates continuity, often uncomfortably, between the structured spaces of lecture theatres and concert halls, so that the divisions between Tar's professional and personal life aren't pronounced. Most of the spaces she inhabits have a similar symmetry and feel, which has the viewer often longing for the respite of variation. There is also a kind of claustrophobia of cut-up space, with action often happening within small sections of the overall frame. As the film progresses, the right angles begin to tilt or take on an asymmetry, evoking the psychological weakening and social isolation and eroding professional and personal certainties of Tar herself. Added to this is the use of lighting. Domestic interiors are often a mix of gloom and golden light, or underlighting, similar to the lighting in concert halls and rehearsal spaces, and even many of the exterior shots, with Tar running, are shot in underpasses with a similar lighting. The dialogue is sharp and witty, and Blanchett is able to take the esoteric language of classical music and the references to conductors and composers in pieces, and make it appealing, even if the typical viewer only has a limited frame of reference. Her delicately sidestepping an old mentor's suggestion to be quoted on the cover of her forthcoming book, and other moments of trying to get her way through the illusion of collaboration, are very sophisticated, as is her reaching and searching for the exacting language with which to express her desires for how the music should be played. There is a particularly good moment when her private secretary is imparting a sentiment or suggestion to her, while Tar is playing abstractly at the piano, and instead of meeting the private secretary's gaze, Tar instead peers into a middle distance as she contemplates the chords she is playing. It is a good character beat that emphasizes the primacy of music over interpersonal relationships. An intriguing scene involves Tar lecturing a smattering of students at Juilliard, and engaging in particular with one student who identifies as BIPOC, and who is driven intensely by and sees his tutelage an approach to musicology through a lens of identity politics. He has an open aversion to listening to and learning the likes of what he characterizes as cisgender or cis-hetero white composers like Mozart or Bach. This is the first time I can think of such a discourse taking place in a big, mature, and, with greater implications, Oscar-baiting film. Tar engages with and indulges the young man's point of view up to a point before unambiguously dismissing, even disparaging it, driving home her own steadfast view that a performer and conductor must sublimate their own identity in service of the music. The scene ends jarringly and abruptly with a young man calling her a bitch and turning his back and leaving. That the screenwriter and Blanchett herself would place themselves firmly in an anti-revisionist position, separating the art and the artist, and advocating for the musical genius overall, is a pronounced departure from the prevailing risk-averse attitudes of the Hollywood system, and heartening not merely for its flag driven into the ground, but also for the apparent lack of pushback generally in cinema and pop culture media. The film isn't perfect. There are a few pretensions, an emotional austerity, and a slightly overweening quality to the whole thing, a self-consciously arty repeating of visual motifs, and there is a not really credible climax involving Tar literally barging a rival conductor from the podium. Dream sequences and dissociative spells don't especially add up to much or elicit much response or intrigue from the viewer, as they tend to be a little too abstract or over-stylishly composed. Side characters have simple or distracting affectations and tics. This sometimes undermines, rather than contrastingly supports, the almost documentary realism and naturalism that is a highlight, with the camera often lingering on professional orchestra players. For some, Tar will be a film more to admire than enjoy. There is more than enough in Tar to discuss and dwell on, and for classical aficionados, this is something to savor. The writer definitely knows his stuff, and many of the allusions, including to the indiscretions of past maestros, are subtle and clever. Tar is a compelling character study, with moments here and there of genuine brilliance.